Ladies and gentlemen, mainly gentlemen, I join with Philip in acknowledging the Boyd Foundation, the original owners, and the Melbourne School for facilitating a visit in such style. Should I architecturalise and organise for any light to be turned off so we can see these images, or we'll just press on?
It's probably, if we can turn off this light, it would be great. It's probably, just try a few.
Just try, yeah.
It's not bad.
So that was a little something on behalf of the group.
Yeah. There's a light switch, sorry, on the second post in, I think. Yeah.
This is the operational historian. One of the great things about working in an office is that you get to find out what's on TV, because it's discussed in a set of mutterings around you during the day. And someone had been on TV and it was recounted how a person who, when they dealt with audiences, spent as long as they possibly could trying to familiarise the audience with the type of material that was to come, and then a very short amount of time actually delivering it. So to try and set that tone, I should point out that Philip's comments are not only overly generous, but written by me. And so that that helps us establish a little plateau where we can talk about reality rather than have me, for instance, on your behalf speak in archi-speak, because I'm here not to win an argument with a Melbourne audience. I'm here to lose it. I'm here to demonstrate some level of shame, because as is fairly appallingly represented, I'm here in a sense as a product salesman, which I know is very much beneath the setting, but I do it from the point of view that all of the profession is reflecting in journals, and I notice in recent editorials that this notion of how the profession needs to market itself back to the community is critical to the profession, and I guess presumptively, therefore, critical to the community. That was the little. You have to learn if it's a firm button, and then you learn that it's the other button. Okay, good. I was reflecting on we need to work on the self-effacement a little bit more before we get any material. So this is me giving a lecture in another house, and it's nice to have a record of it because it's a way of speaking to the idea of where value might lie. Because as part of talking about marketing, we're going to do a little bit of admission that all of us who practice and all of us who live in the type of world we do now are almost irretrievably part of an economy. And so to accept that the things that architects appreciate trying to do on behalf of other people also has to coexist in the way the economy works makes me reflective of how you might market, and causes me to try out the opposite of the usual tone, so that I'm not going to try and persuade you about anything. I would appeal for your help, since I'm not very good at this, and the bluntness with which I admit that you're here as part of a trial run of a marketing idea is something that I'll kind of dose up along the way, so it doesn't seem too direct. What is... this house is not as beautiful as the one we're in, and I'm not going to describe why this one is beautiful. That I think has been done from lots of points of view and in lots of settings. But it is enchanting to be reminded that the capacity that we're having the evidence that we're having a public event here reminds us that the value in a place is often not through the taylorization or the adherence to its program, but through offering something that has value beyond what was imagined and beyond what was asked for. And I think that's the thing that architects often try to do, and I wonder if there's a way of very forwardly expressing that in one of these, say, 11 bids that I'm going to put to you about how we might market the profession, rather than do the classic 1990s marketing move, which is about the front foot and who you know and lots of FaceTime. Perhaps a way of explaining it is with reference to just another little of these effacement warnings. There's hardly any slides. And we've made up this mosaic, which is a table in the exhibition, which deliberately sets out so that people might have to sit at the table and spend perhaps some time trying to focus on all these little fragments. But it was fun to orchestrate in the office, so that one of our pre-grad people just had to go through our entire photo collection and work out how to make a mosaic of photographs that had people in the building. So it would work out from my point of view now to talk about cigarettes. So that there's a very up-and-coming ad company in the US, and I've been reading far too much like North American literature as part of sorting out about the market, and like a good architect, I'm turning myself into a little functional economist. And then it's very non-PowerPoint, I know, but you're at risk of having things quoted to you, like not even with the writing on the PowerPoint, but I'm actually going to pick it up and say it to you. So the thing about this groovy little outfit in, they were in somewhere like very obscure, and now they're somewhere very important. Which is the main message. I can't remember the names. So it's all, again, it's like, it's all inference, no content. And there's a lot of cigarette smoking amongst youth in that community. And there'd been a spell of investment in saying, oh, look, you mustn't smoke. Because remembering in the history of not smoking, then there'd been the idea that the science of it became so heavy that it became agreeable to make it into public policy, so that the science could be used politically to try, by people in leadership positions, to stop people smoking. And which is the kind of old-fashioned diagram where the person in the leadership position tries to take the high moral ground and then tell other people how good that ground is, and how, on behalf of the authorities, what a warrant they have. I'm trying to be cautious as an architect contemplating my marketing future, that I don't get onto that same platform. So we have, for instance, we see in the climate science debate that because various authorities whom no one likes, because no one likes the governments who are saying we should do something about it, because they don't trust the governments, and they don't want to be told what to do by the environmentalists because they don't trust the environmentalists. So therefore, suddenly climate change is not actually about climate change, but whether you vote left or right. So that this forwardness about how an authority group joins with another authority group to convince the public about how good things could be for them, I'm unsure if as architects we should go that way. I'm also practicing a new non-absolute tone, where I don't claim anything in a manifesto type way, or seek to have the ultimate opinion, and I'm likely to lose concentration on that as we move along. So at any point where I would slip into something as repulsive as overemphasis, if someone could cough or move their chair, whatever it takes to deal with overemphasis, that would be appreciated. But back to cigarettes. So because the kids weren't responding to being told how bad they were, this ad company just ran a whole lot of viral little episodes around the town that included tacky stuff like brochures at nightclubs and various YouTube things about what cigarette companies were up to. So no talk of how bad smoking was, just how evil cigarette companies were. The thing just fixed, no more smoking. So that if we were to take that piece of thinking, have a little mosquito that's come all the way from home, that I'll make various approaches about trying to describe the sensibility, which is why I've set up this tribute to the OXO Cup, which will have 3 dimensions. I like being able to talk about something, at least at the start, that's not about myself. And so the idea that one could dedicate something as a tribute to something else, I think in the 21st century way, is apparently very market savvy. So by thinking of an OXO cup, of course, you're supposed to, like, through little kind of synaptic processes, end up thinking about an amorphous set of tonalities or capacities that architects, and particularly ourselves, since remember, I'm appealing to you to tell us how to market, since we have no specialty, and because we don't market, therefore our portfolio is worth nothing. Because we're only a small firm and we don't generate any data about what we do, so we don't do anything. So I've got to move on it in another way. And I think in the way that I'm projecting about how we might market, I would risk saying, see how I didn't just go straight to telling you, I would risk saying that the difficulties that I have in trying to work out how to market our firm are often the difficulties that architecture has in general about trying to market itself to its population. So the charm of the OXO cup, and here they are at the office, and this is how I got practice explaining to people why there was a lot of OXO cups at the office. And the thing about it, as Philip has read from the introduction, is that no one asked for this cup. So it's this great move away from being problem solving. And the way that it came about through the Mr. and Mrs. Farber, who own OXO, and Betsy Farber is arthritic. And Mr. Farber, who used to have a company that made the odd kitchen utensil, really got into this as a project and did a nice thing where he didn't say, I'm going to fix this. He said, I'm going to go to some design people and try and work out how we could forward this. So then I've been reading the literature of the people he's referred to, such as IDEO and Pentagram and all these, Tim Brown, all these people who work in North America, who compared to architects are very articulate about explaining how their work as designers connects with how people do things. So I would recommend any of this, like you just sort of can pan across new publications about design from America in the library, and they will take you to a place that no other architectural writer will take you. This is you're getting the sense of how they loop these little arguments. Back at the OXO cup. They came across it because the way that OXO develops things on behalf of other people is not to find problems. It has a very structured way of listening and getting access to people while they cook. So that it was noticed by a designer, and this is the kind of designer I think it's interesting to try and explain back to people, that when you fill a measuring cup conventionally, this is when we move direct to the products. I think I'd rather be ashamed of being a product salesman than bear the embarrassment of trying to tell you that as an architect we know more about the community than you do and that we need more media opportunities. Okay, so when you're using an ordinary measuring cup, to check how much is in it, well, you need to look at the side, and then you put a bit more in, and then look at the side. The thing with the OXO cup is you can fill it from the top, and then as it's filling, you can read the measurement off the edge. So that, as mentioned in the introduction, this makes barely any difference on the surface. But it is intriguing because the following for this cup actually is a thing that you might value, because people don't like the design of the OXO cup. People just love the cup. They love the way it makes a difference to their life. Since this thing came out, remember the Alessi days of Philip Stark with the orange juicer and all this? Monsieur Stark only works for Target now. Because the reality is that if you were to bring things to people, it's not because they're so designer. The value is in how they're somehow wonderful in your life. So that it turned out, and we found out through all kinds of inference by working on the web, that of the loyalty, because there was a point where it might be taken off the market. And this is a professional American cocktail mixers outfit. They went into outrage at the idea that it was going to be withdrawn, because in terms of them working in the dark, it's so unsmooth when you order a martini and the waiter sort of holds up in front of you and sort of measures things in. So the smoothness with which they could just like toss gin in from the top has meant that they've become terribly attached to it. What I'm so far-fetched as to suggest is that this fondness for things is actually where their value is. It's the love part of using something, not the admiration part of thinking how something is designed, that actually has economic value. So that's preposterous, and obviously I'll need to circle back to that many times. So that as part of the way we have organised the exhibition, and it's part of my middle-aged focal length arrangements, where I can't see my notes. There's a suite of themes that I thought I'd use some of the material in the exhibition to expound on. So if we were therefore to talk about where this value is going to be generated, and if we accept just for the evening that we're all part of an economy, then it's interesting to look at the point when our profession as a group is trying to hammer home how on behalf of governments we should do things. And there should be ministers of design, and there should be design institutes, and there should be more respect, there should be more following in the papers, is to look at the papers and see the number of times that the architect is mentioned. It's prolific, it's absolutely daily. And whenever it's used, of course, it's never in relation to someone from our profession. But what is fascinating is that it seems to be so widely understood what an architect is by implication that everyone is free to use it in reference to all kinds of people who have a quite consistent set of characteristics, one of which is they have never been creative. They never made a bold statement, but they did make very lateral applications of conventions in order to achieve changes to reality. They did negotiate that with large teams of people along the way. They did therefore trade in psychological goods. They did make a difference, good or bad, and then they have to cop the consequences of the insights that they had. And they rely on a working body of knowledge. These people are never inspired. So inspired people are called artists. So I would go so far as to say that one of the risks to any marketing strategy where we're trying genuinely to look after people is for a moment to suggest that we're creative. Firstly, because we need and will always deal with people who have money. And if you assert how you're the creative one in the whole equation, then how you use the credit card is just going to get incredibly wobbly. Because the idea that you would vest money in someone who says that they are the creative person in the whole outfit is to kind of challenge presumptions about how economies work. I think not in as a constructive way as it could be. So I'm getting much better at it. And the other thing about claiming that one is creative is to claim that you belong to a privileged group and that the business that goes on inside one's own brain is kind of so special that it can't be revealed, as it is with an artist. It has a license to be made into something that's at the level of the mysterious and wonderful. Whereas I think that might be more positive if we were to be just extremely disclosing about the material that we worked with, the way we worked with it, and the results we were trying to get on behalf of other people. Let's move through some of these little extracts. So that the way we would set up the exhibition is to clarify, particularly with the students, that a lot of the things that they might end up seeing published about buildings are the result not of the architect being creative, but of the architect being the generalist in the background, doing the lateral reorganising of critical information to get results that no one else in the system would be able to envisage, because they haven't been trained the way we have to tolerate doubt and criticism and to relentlessly trial to get to a result. And because if we acknowledged that part of what we do in our work is not to be masters but to be lateral, then the potency with which we could account for how we get results, I think, might be of interest. So in this example, the architect's developed a living, digital. The thing was alive. You could turn it upside down, and anyway, it's a massive algorithm of the suite of lift heights that relate to the amount of served floor plate as a percentage of lost core over rental returns on size of floor plate. Okay, that designs the building. Let's not pretend that we were really after a square one. And when we got to the top, because we could only have X amount of lifts, it could only serve a certain amount of floor area, right? We didn't have a kind of an expressionistic kind of, it didn't happen in the shower. We didn't see it in a crumpled piece of paper or something, that the top of the building actually had to have smaller floors if those dear lifts were ever actually going to make it up there. Notwithstanding, by distributing the value the way we did in the building and orchestrating how it could come out of the ground very quickly because it has a basement inside its outer shell, which has thin studio offices around it, the building could commence construction so quickly that they could not only arrive at a point in the market where they were available to be leased, that they could start leasing occupant floors before the building was finished. So what the architect did was work all that out. And I'm practicing about explaining this because, it might give us marketing edge. Now, it hasn't so far, but I'm wondering, this is where I need your help, about what the possibilities are. So because being able to generate the building to happen at such pace, you are able to deploy various resources at the base. And because they had a landlocked site, the logic of being able to produce a new public lane became something that was so essentially critical to the diagram that through the architect's work, it became necessary to construct it, which has then got its various attachments as it enters the city. And the question that I can't sort out and that I put to our profession and to the universities is that as practitioners, we were able to measure what it is that should be put in and taken out of the building so that we could produce this space. But there isn't a way of measuring whether it has any value. It's only presumed. So that, for instance, if we could now say, and measure not all what happened on the input side, but measure what happened on the output side, we could probably put a value on this lane. For instance, I think 9,000 people a day walk through it. The tenancies that are attached to either side of it are worth 3 times more than tenancies in the other streets. So if that value could be measured and endorsed, then for instance, it could be constructed as a tax relief so that people who didn't generate value to that extent were taxed harder on what it is that they'd built than people who did actually generate public value. So this is the loop of saying that if you acknowledge that public value could be measured and that it participated in an economy like everything else, then you could do things like restructure tax, which is how the rest of the world works. You restructure tax in the way that, in how and when you might die and what happens with kidney diseases. You have tax structures about so much else that if we had more data about the built environment, could we not regulate it in the way that you orchestrate so many other profound changes to our society in the same way? It would need, though, for us to come up with ideas, probably definitively, about what design was. Just publish it. Here's 10 things about it. And here's way that we've got a suite of PhD students working on how you could measure it. So that's one about if the data was available through the way our profession was with its academic and financial partners, then from everyone's point of view, we could generate anything. So obviously, I'm not the sort of person who can be let loose to do it, but if I was let loose to talk to Lend-Lease and I said, well, could we set up a research centre in a university that's structured a way that we could make this measurement and say that all these places where people can be actually add to the value of what's been invested to such an extent that you would deserve a reward, not what you've done before you've done it, but what happened afterwards, then it might be of interest. So then if we have a go at another one, which is in the same building, where we did the move. It was part of the way we'd orchestrated. We had savings, therefore we could spend money on sun control. Now, let's not do any pretending that it makes much difference to the climate of the building, because as we know, green buildings are black. They're just reflective, they have triple glazing, and they sort it out. But we were able to make these sunshades so that in doing so, the edge to the story is not that we went to all the buildings in Brisbane that had sunshades and said, well, look, if it's like this, it's like an eyebrow. It's not nice inside. And if we do it like this, it's glum. And if we do it like this, or we live with this framing. So is there a way we could do it where there was no eyebrow, where it was backlit and the framing wasn't in your view? I guess the ticky-tacky part of the story is that we dragged the real estate agents and the owners all through these research tasks so that they weren't something that was the architect saying, oh, I've got this idea, I think we should bend some gussets. It was saying, you know, I think it's going to be worth something, and by bringing them to those sites, we went into the strange zone of the economy where people in other spheres are very prepared to go, which is, we know it's valuable, but we can't quite put our finger on what it is. In other words, there's another value to be acknowledged that's not measurable, because no one goes onto these floors and says, oh, and at least this floor, I love the inboard details of the sun control. But what does happen is there's a bit of head scratching, and people say, you know, these floors are quite nice. And so I think that's a wonderful thing for architects to say and describe to people that they do, is that they actually make things that are valuable, so valuable that they can't be defined in a single moment or through a simple gesture or recounted in a single paragraph. You can see how long it's taken me just to get you to like this setting. But with your help, well, it could be refined, I'm sure. So we take these little breathers, as it were, where we go back to looking at more people in places. And then we look at something where what the architect has done has offered their research to the client, not by saying that I've chosen an example of a restaurant quite specifically, because the momentum in designing the restaurant is obviously going to be towards, oh, the atmosphere, you're just going to melt. Or, we can match the styling of the restaurant to the food, or some other thing. So what we did with these people was role play and say, all the atmosphere stuff, look, that's easy. But in order to make it work in an extremely tiny place, will you sit down with us? And we designed it 7 times. We had 7, and the thing about it was that each of the 7 had all of the constraints in. So there's none of this thing about how there was the bubble diagram. Bubble diagrams are bullshit because they aren't reactive enough to enough things. Because when we went through this restaurant and realised that the only way you could ever get enough room to make a kitchen was to put it in a bay window on the street, and that if you ever to work the dining room, that had to have a certain number of people that would justify the spending in the kitchen. Now, we could never get the client to tell us that unless we were with them, not while we hectored them, but while we said, now, there's how many chefs in here, there's how many people trying to get through, there's how many people you need in order to turn over 200,000 every quarter, which meant that we needed X amount of toilets, which meant that I think it's a thing, again, to be somehow triumphant about being able to talk to people about, is this restaurant is viable because we figured out how to do the toilet. If we didn't, they would never have opened. And it's that other great thing, which is a contest. It's a nice thing to say in Melbourne because it's such a particular contest to say to the people from Sydney, that often because something is clear, it's not necessarily good. So this thing is completely strange because the way it's sort of is that there's a disabled toilet in the middle of the restaurant, which is absolutely irrational and totally logical. And so on the way that it's presented in the exhibition, it actually recounts what really went on, and then there's a ... as it goes into archi-speak. Amplify the experience of arrival and the passage between the public bar and the private dining. So we can see how they've been transitioned apart from each other. So why, as architects, are we prepared to talk about this thing that's all very phenomenologic, but not demonstrate the value we've generated on behalf of our client by putting a dunley in the middle of a joint, where that is the dunny there, which is a piece of sliding mirror that reflects the cellar on the other side, which means that amongst the other interiors of where it is, it gets to co-anticipate like another fragment. So then there's other things about if we acknowledge that there's value in what can't be named, there's value in what can be measured, and there's value in things that make the irrational operational, then is there, how does the laterality of almost the pure mathematics work? So that this is the diagram of why the library works. So that when we waltzed in, we had the table set for the wedding in the public terrace. Now, like many, many buildings, of course, all of the things that make the difference are not the things we were ever asked to do. I mean, this idea that architects fulfill the brief, I mean, that we should remain complicit. I nearly took on my tone then. I was going to say that architects have become complicit in this idea that presenting back to people the way we solve the brief somehow is important. Why don't we say to people, oh, actually, it's the things we're not asked to do that make the difference? Because they rarely do. And there's almost like a sense way of doing it, where you can, that the thing that's going to push the most buttons in the job is the thing that has been the problem while it's been in construction and in contemplation, which in the end then turns out to be the thing that everyone loves. So that's what happened to the library. We were briefed to have this much of the library. The library is supposed to be a repository extension, but they gave us the amount of repository space in square metres. And we said, no, I think it's more responsible, because we're spending public money, if you tell us how much you have to store. Well, I don't know that. So we worked out a way to measure it, and we hired extra people, and we went out and measured how much stuff they had, and then worked out with an economist that they could refer us to about how to amplify what that would become as a sensible projection of the amount of money that you were spending in terms of how much future capacity you had, and then worked out how much repository you needed to build if you thought about it as something that was in cubic metres, not square metres. So we worked out how to pack the books very tightly and still mechanically look after them, and then incorporate the cost for expansion, that when it gets to a certain point, you re-catalogue the books so that they're not catalogued by subject, they're catalogued by size, so that all the 381mm books are collected, and then all the 402mm books are collected, and at that, when we get to that point, having spent the money, which will then be very small, to double digitise the collection with 2 call numbers, you'll fit that into that, which means we returned spare floor area to expand that into that, so that we just end up, through that act of logic, with that room. Now, that is the thing to try and explain, I think, on behalf of our profession, because it's those sort of moves that really make difference to people. And then this comes into the multi-category. It's not clear why it's nice. That's fine. The amount of times that it's used, the fact that it generates income for the library, the fact that it's related, remembering that if you look at Andrew, here, this is what I was dying to do, like Andrew Lee, elected to Parliament on the basis that he's produced a mountain of statistics about Australian social capital, okay? So they can measure the value of Australian social capital. And he said, he's collected a mountain of data, he doesn't know what to do with it, he's so shocked. There's volunteering. Where do they go to volunteer? There's associational memberships. Where do these associations meet? There's workplaces, we can imagine that. There's neighbourhoods. Are they not built out of buildings? There's religious beliefs. Are they not practiced in worship spaces? A participation in sport. Are there not buildings and landscapes where they play sport? And cultural activities that crunch the numbers on Australian social capital. So again, another challenge. Why isn't it that we can't work out when there's such a way that you're able to calculate social capital, whatever the crap that is, but you can't calculate whether this has any value? And within the social capital, we can't say that any of it was attached to the built environment. So that if we just bluntly said, this might be recountable, by using the OXO cup method, where we listen out for what turns out to be critical, rather than go barking like Lassie saying that we need it in order to lead the world, or the current thing, I just may as well do a bit of overstepping with the sustainable and the world's ending, and all the poor students now, they design a bus stop and say, well, because carbon's doing this and the world's going to run out and life as we know it is finished, therefore my bus stop looks like this. And so the idea that architects would attach themselves to a crisis in order to portray themselves in the community as leaders by offering redemption is exactly what the modernists did on the Cheyenne boat. So I just think we should be careful, and that's like the worst I'll get all evening. Now we're just... Then here we are making a building where they gave us the space. This is what we need. And we said, okay, you've got a lot of people there, they're doing a lot of things. Are all of the people in all of the building all of the time? No. So then you do the whole thing where you work out how to interact with people, you work out how to collect the data, and then you remap it and get them all to role play and work out how to make the building more efficient, and then you just make this with the spare money. Now, and again, I think that's the way we've headed it on the student board, is that it was not required, it's not in the brief. And there's some hesitation as to why, if we had efficiency in the building, we'd spend it on this place. Of course, now that it's there, because it's about humans doing things with other people and finding in their own wobbly way how they could kind of love a subject or love a possibility, that they end up being able to demonstrate that that space has economic value. So, good or bad, I'm telling you, it makes money. And so I'm proud, in that way, of saying that I didn't create it. I just organised for it to exist. Building the education revolution, that gave sad story, all the money, $650,000 tuck shops the size of a single garage. Do it every day, except with really big buildings. But this is an interesting one about how to participate in the community, because it's a tiny school. We were given a job, we had $2.5 million to spend on 24 schools. So we just went to a whole lot of schools and snipped things out of them so they worked a bit better, rather than, because we had no money to add anything on. What became interesting about this one is that we did the whole thing with the role play, because there's no, you can actually see the kind of 19th century thing where the classrooms and the corridors would have been. And we end up with this moment, where this is grade 4. So the thing about that one, I think, to recount, is that it very nearly didn't work. Because the whole idea that you'd rely on the architect's insight, again, is not enough. And I think that's where we have to be careful about what we credit. Because this principal was really savvy, so that when the school opened up as a set of kind of edited wreckage of what it was, the staff were a little bit taken aback. Because even though they'd participated in what it was, which was their Italian-based teaching model, they weren't sure how to use it. So there was a training system involving one of our architects about how to orchestrate the things that they imagined doing with kids in the space that they now had. But I think the loveliest aspect of the story is not that then that was achieved. The principal, bright chick that she is, she moved into this place and all the students' bags used to be inspected for weapons and so forth, and then 5 years later they're being taught here. So again, it's the thing, by utter and completely, shouldn't be too firm, it was constructive avoidance of the education department, which meant that you could deal directly, not again through where the architect always likes to act, which is with another authority, but with the actual chick on the ground. And so this chick, having worked out how the staff could then operate it, did something that architects tend not to think that they could do. Because we say, you know, one of the things we should do is get into those schools, tell those kids how good design is. She invented curricula for these grade 4 kids so that they went through design exercises to work out if there were other ways the building could have been changed apart from the one that was done, which they now use as a reference system to tweak up various things. So the kids in grade 4 are taught, not by architects, but by their teachers, to do a design course. So the difference between being a person and learning about what design is through that level of participation, rather than having ponces like me come in and say how great it is, I think it's a really, really big thing. And then we just have a last one where, say we're building, in this case we're building an apartment building, and the thing of course is absolutely geared, particularly where we're from, that the thing's not even going to get out of the ground unless it's sold. So that what happens to every dollar is critical. So we can just take like 5 seconds off and say, that is such a sexy precast panel. Okay, it's over. And then these are the diagrams from Germany which we sent forward of the crane capacities. These are the 2 crane sites. You can see the plane of the building. And this is the BIM modelling of how all of the panels in the building, if the builder let us sort it out, we scheduled each type, each weight, and this is the order in which you'd produce them, so that every panel could be put on the building with the carrying capacity of those 2 cranes. So like, computers are great, but you don't go around the place saying, computing's great. I think it might be better if we went around saying, look, if architects did have a level of participation in construction, then we could make buildings in a way that makes them more efficient. Now that's a bit of a trap, because only 40% of the building is the material anyway. So I think it might be an occasion to talk about an alternative where instead of saying, oh, we need to make more affordable housing, so we need to make it cheaper, why don't we say we need to make more affordable housing by reorchestrating where the value is? Because in a building like this, 30% of the cost of the project is tax. So there's a whole, let's not go there, meaning like, because we're in the building industry, that actually is a huge participatory thing in the whole Australian economy. But let's acknowledge that the economy does make a difference to what these buildings look like. So that because there's so much that happens in tax, and then there's so much that happens in the pace of the way these things get done, and there's so much about the way the thing is financed, that means it all has to be offered as a fait accompli before it's built. What about if we used another way of compiling the apartment building? So if we all get very Web 2 and forward and say, well, we can actually go to people. If we use the OXO cup system, I reckon you could go to people who live in medium density housing and just make this fabulous list of pet peeves. You know, the tiniest things about what the rubbish door does, and it slams at 11 and then I wake up. Whatever those things are. And then that way we could directly collect some data from people and respond to it by offering designs, not of the whole scheme, but the designs that responded to that issue. So that, because at the moment, the only thing we have to work on in these situations when there's no client is data that comes from real estate agents or failed footy players. Not that they're a failure, it's just that you can't play footy indefinitely. So then you have to start selling real estate. So for instance, if you ran the blog and instead of collecting deposits from people, you collected expressions of interest people about this in this idea, then you wouldn't even need all of the people to put down the deposit. Because the way other enterprises work on Web 2 is that if people who had some money thought that it was a good idea, they would invest in it, which means I think it's quite possible that you could use a micro-lending system to make apartment buildings and like absolutely nail the way all the banks are involved, and then put the thing out to construction, not on the idea that there's builders' margins, but on the idea that if it's good and there's a measurement in place about whether it is, then the builder will be given 20% of the building as a holding to be distributed amongst the employees. So I know you've got, this is the new, like we thought he was just a marketeer, but no, he's a beatnik. It's not. I'm describing the post-GFC financial model of the world that does actually acknowledge the operation of collective capital. So that the old model is you make profits and then you distribute them amongst foundations. The new model is that the thing intrinsically produces things that have value. There's the two good stories. It's okay, we're nearly finished. The one is the way the money was spent on the Indian Commonwealth Games and the way the money was spent on the FIFA Games in South Africa. In India, the money comes down, lots of people to administrate it, lots of contracts let for major things, lots of arrangements made, lots of proprieties, passes on to the next group, they make subcontracts, lots of things are ripped off, lots of proprieties, keeps going down, till in the end, you've got an Indian with a broom and sewage on the floor. So that we've used the 20th century model of how everyone jumped in on the thing from the point of view that the only thing to achieve was a success with a deal. That the actual building that you made in the end wasn't of value. So I think so those of us at the conference were very beautifully reminded by a lot of our guests that there is a lot more to a building than whether it stacks up as a deal. And the international visitors were very confident about speaking about that. So with the FIFA stadium, they got 4 people from FIFA. They went to South Africa because they operated the registry. This is obviously an abbreviated version of the story, and I am sure I could be faulted on some of my details, but it's a way of anecdotally recounting it. 4 people go to South Africa, they operate a register. If you work on the building in a genuine way, and there's a way of measuring that and a threshold, you get recorded on the register. If the building is complete before the games and you're on the register, you get a ticket. So you don't even get a financial reward. You get a reward that values you to such an extent that you can sit with the people who could pay the money for the building that you built. And that's post-GFC spending. So I think, and they're the people I think as architects we would like to work for, not the old dudes. So that has got manifestations with construction. I would suggest about how by enabling contractual processes to have genuine participation from those people who want to build them, and by having a lucidity about how we exchange between them, which is the potential but not the reality of how managed contracting works. Managing contracting is going to happen. We have to make it work. The answer, I'm having to be brief, which means I've got to be rude, is that the universities just need to train an enormous number of architects so that you entirely displace the entire project management profession and entirely displace all the design managers within the building industry, and you entirely displace all tastemakers who operate within local authorities who've never got over the fact that they got into the second choice after school. So, because managing contracting is about separate people with technologies, so that the way they have to be coordinated means that the architect as the master is out, but the architect as the orchestrator is in. So this is the scenario. Look, there's a random facade. Now we don't have to be in charge of the random facade. So that what we ended up with was, where's our big heroic shot of that? No. Slippage. There it is. So that's the random facade. It's okay, all it needs to be is random. So, but what is actually going on is that all of these were placed so that in the legal limits of what can be an adjustable aperture in a safety skin on the building was that size, and then the bolt points for how that skin was held up, which were at regular centres, are in the slab, allowing sleeve points about where these things were put in. So that by not having the will to say this is where these things must be, but simply saying, actually contractually, look, they've got to be random and let us know what the criteria is going to be, then I think that's another thing that as architects we could be proud to say we did. Rather than saying, you know, I got them to do it my way, you just say, oh look, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm just Mr. Flexible, or better still, Miss Flexible. because the way that you might then work with that doubt and that open-endedness, which women are much better at than men, would be a great way forward. So if we close in seconds on a little experiment we did to be reminded that actually going towards people, rather than going towards the people who administer people, is an okay thing for architects to do, because, look, Wikipedia, they said it would never work. eBay, they said it would never work. So when I say I think architects could go straight to the people, obviously we need to say, but that will never work. But what if it did? Since that is where our interest lies. So we had a go at it, and the way we did it was at this kind of installation thing we'd set up, and we took photographs of this place that we'd been directed to make at the cultural centre. In Brisbane you can get in the cab and say, take me to cultural centre. And so this is the State Library. And the way we worked it on the day is that these carried a question and then a photoshopped potentiality, which is ridiculously abstract, existed as an alternative. And then people they had 3 ways that they gave their responses, so they could choose how they responded. So that all of the instructions that I took about how that was to be laid out was made by an administrative class who were extremely sure they knew what was best. We organised for all the responses to be catalogued, so that it was very interesting that when we made these proposals, the public's response was not marginal. 80% of people want that. And then in other settings, I've got this system that I do where I over-present this one and mock that one until the public get in such a rage. I've had some audience difficulties. So I get up and say, now, the thing about this is it presents culture with a kind of propriety. There's ways from the main road that, because the huge traffic island only has short grass on it, you can actually see these great institutions, and there's lots of space around them, which is part of what makes them great. Okay, so you do that, and the audience goes, he's a dickhead. But that's exactly the reasoning that was given to me, which is now translated on the ground. So then you say to the public, now this mess actually is kind of disgraceful, because these institutions are, the proper part of the state, and this is just people living in housing right next door. And look at the mess they make on the street and how there's hardly any room for tourist buses to get past. And they just go, we love the idea, I want to live there. So that is offered, that is suggested, and then you do get reminded that the people who, because architects do have a lot of faith in each other, and of all the work and things that they put up with, we do all know that we really do want to look after people, which is why we are offended by some things and enthusiastic about others. So where I seek your help is in working out how we could describe what it is that we do for people. There we go, on time.